Hi, folks. Welcome to our Google Plus Hangout with the Buck Institute for Education. I'm John Larmer, the editor-in-chief here at BIE, and today we'll be talking about our model for gold standard project-based learning and one of our essential project design elements, authenticity in PBL. So before I ask our guests to introduce themselves, a quick word here about the logistics. You can ask questions on the Google Plus events page, and I'll be able to see them, and if I can get them into the conversation, I will, and if we can't get to them, we'll answer them afterward on the Google Plus events page. So please do ask questions if you have them. And this Hangout is being archived also. It's being recorded. It'll be archived at BIE.org. And so you can watch it later or tell friends about it. If you missed some of it, you can watch it again and again. So we hope you enjoy it. Let's hear from our guests. Who we got today? Some guests from across the country and locally. So John?
Thanks, John. John Glaber, and I teach high school English at Redwood High School in Larkspur, California, freshman, and also AP English Language and Composition, which is mostly juniors and a few seniors.
Okay. Thanks, John. And Todd?
Yeah, I'm Todd Wigginton, currently serve as Director of Instruction for Metro Nashville Public Schools in Nashville, Tennessee. I was a teacher for 18 years. And we began a partnership with BIE at the district level about 4 years ago. And I became one of the trainers here locally and now serve on national faculty with BIE as well.
All right, thanks, Todd. And Jane?
Hi, good afternoon or good morning to some of those of you on the Pacific Coast, I guess. I think it's still morning over there, isn't it?
No, just afternoon.
Okay, so good afternoon. I was right the first time.
Yeah.
I'm Cheney Mosley. I'm currently the Senior College and Career Readiness Specialist with American Institutes for Research. That's new. Last week, I was working for Metro Nashville Public Schools as well. I was the director of the Academies of Nashville. So we're wall-to-wall career academies, 16,000 students in 12 different schools. And part of that required that I facilitate our business and industry partner relationships, especially when it came to implementing project-based learning.
All right, thanks for being with us, Jane. Yeah, I should just reiterate what Todd said, that Metropolitan Nashville is one of our long-standing district partners, so we're very proud of their work and look forward to seeing the results continue to be good there in Nashville. A lot of good PBL happening there. So. All right, so let's dig into our topic. Now, we have a new model for gold standard project-based learning. You can see here, those are the essential project design elements, and you can read more about those on our website at BIE.org. We have articles about that and blogs about those, and our Hangouts all this year, from last fall until spring, will be about each of the design elements. And today we're talking about authenticity. You can see there on the right. Next week we'll be talking about, or next Hangout, to say in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about our gold standard model for project-based teaching practices. But today is how to design a project, and one of the features of that, of a gold standard, high-quality project, we think, is authenticity. So let me ask our guests what they think about that. What does authenticity mean in project-based learning, and why is it important? John, how about we start with you again?
Sure. Well, I'm sort of a regular classroom teacher, so I have to look for ways to integrate PBL and authenticity into regular classroom that has a sort of 7-period day. And within the structure of that, I try to focus on 3 elements, and they really do connect to other parts of the model for essential design elements. For the challenging problem or task, I try to make sure that it's always a real-world topic, some current event. And in terms of the text that we are using, these are authentic texts. These are real texts that are written by real professionals in real-world contexts. I try to make sure that the project is authentic in terms of students having voice and choice. If they are staking out a position on a controversial issue, this should be one that they truly believe in and not one that they've just been assigned. And then finally, with respect to public product, we try to make sure that there's an authentic audience for that product so that they feel that their writing, or if it's a live presentation or some multimedia piece, is going to have a real application in the world.
All right, thanks, John. I like your point that authenticity includes other project design elements too, right? An authentic problem, authentic texts and voice and choice for students. Good point. Todd?
Yeah, I agree. And I like the word he used right there at the end, the application of what it is we want our students to know and be able to do, and finding a way to make that apply in a real-world context, I think is really what we like to see happening in our classes. We want our teachers to know where it is what they're teaching does apply in the real world, and give students the chance to make those applications themselves.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, you got 2 cents on this one?
Yeah, just a little bit. When I think of authenticity, or when I have conversations with teachers about whether their project is authentic or not, the question that I ask is, when will the creation of their products, when would that also be used in either the world of work or a real world context? And if a teacher cannot answer that question, then I think that the project is probably not authentic. So it's that it has to be as John said in the beginning, a real-world context, so the student can then transfer what he or she is learning to that real-world context later.
Okay. Yeah, real world is the key word we use to describe authenticity for sure. And I like, actually, John, you mentioned this too. It's also real to the student's world. It's real to the outside world, but also to their own concerns, their own interests, their own issues in their lives. So, John, you mentioned personalizing issues, so it's their own stance on something. That's another kind of authenticity.
Yeah, it is, and I think that that this really, it ties to the importance of authenticity with respect to student engagement. So, particularly at the level where I teach, the high school level, students are they're increasingly aware of the world around them and how what's happening in the arena of, let's say, public policy is affecting their lives and the lives of their friends. So, for example, we do a project in my classroom on immigration reform. And in the course of that, they're doing some things that are very common core. They're reading a book-length piece of nonfiction about a student who's an immigrant coming to the United States. They're writing arguments as well. These are all common core reading and writing requirements. But I begin that unit by bringing in a former student of mine who came here to the United States from Central America. He was brought here when he was just 2 years old. And he's grown up in our community the entire time, and he's undocumented. And so a lot of my current students know this guy because they've known him since he was in kindergarten. But they have never known that he was undocumented. And so this is just a really sort of personal, real-world, authentic way in to a current issue for them that's very controversial, not just nationwide, but right in our community, and they can sort of see that in the form of a classmate of theirs.
And John, you mentioned authenticity as a way to get engagement at the beginning of your comments right there. So I just want to just kind of reiterate for people that the reason authenticity is important is it's really a way to engage students, which you'll hear when you hear more examples like John and Todd will share, and that increases learning. So that's kind of the bottom line that we've seen in observing project-based learning that the more authentic it is to students' lives or with the real world, then they tend to learn more deeply. They care more. They can connect things to the real world, so it sinks in better. They can apply what they're learning, so there's a learning payoff for authenticity. It's not only engagement for engagement's sake. So Cheney just dropped out for a second. We'll try to get him back on. So Todd, let's go on to both John and Todd. And John, you already kind of led into this. Let's talk about some examples of projects and how teachers can design projects to be authentic. So let's hear some stories about projects.
Sure. But one thing I do want to kind of emphasize is there's a spectrum of authenticity. So when you're first doing project-based learning, you might want to start with some simulations and things like that, and grow into areas where they're moving from simulations to more of working with experts in the field on some things, and you can even bring them in, for example, mock trials and mock congressional hearings and those kind of things. We're working with some teachers on some of those right now. But early on, it's one of those things that you can start slow and gain momentum over time. Projects that I've seen, I'm thinking about one last year that one of our third grade teachers did, and she was doing a geometry unit with third graders, but it was on building a city or rebuilding their neighborhood, basically, and they had an architect come in as their entry event and talked about how architecture and engineering is used in the real world to introduce geometry concepts to the students. And they had to then take some of the geometry that they learned and apply that as they kind of created their model or renovation of their model neighborhood.
All right, and John, you want to tell us about that project you began telling us about? It sounded great. If you want to tell us more about that one or other ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like Todd's observation about that spectrum of authenticity, and there being a number of different ways in which you can introduce authenticity into a project. And I think it's important to understand that each one of these dimensions of authenticity has the effect of sort of raising the stakes for students, and that's going to directly connect to engagement. So as you were mentioning, John, the learning doesn't stop in the classroom, but you'll hear students coming in the next day saying to you, just anecdotally, you know, I was talking to my mom and dad over the dinner table about what we're doing in school, and that's, you know, there's no substitute for that. That's authentic engagement. They're excited about it. So, for example, the immigration reform project that we were talking about, one of the things that they do is they write, after they've learned all about the issues on immigration reform, they pick a legislator, and it can be any legislator working at the state or federal level in any political party, and they write a personal letter to that legislator encouraging the legislator to take certain actions as a lawmaker with respect to immigration reform. So they've got a real authentic audience. They, you know, for many of them, this is the first time they've ever even found out who their legislator is, never mind written a letter to her or to him. And that really raises the stakes for them in terms of their engagement with what they're writing and thinking about their audience. And these are all things that, to make good writers, we want students to think about. What's the rhetorical purpose? Who's your audience? How do you tell your message to your audience? So they spend a lot of time on these letters. They get very excited about them. But that's an example of a high school level. I worked with a charter school down in Southern California during a really bad part of the drought. And I was working with a teacher who was working with her students on a project that related to the drought and water conservation. And so they learned all about it. They did some research. They learned about the science of it. And then they made educational posters that went up all around the school. And they tried to see if they could do a sort of promotional or marketing campaign and have a contest to where instead of having a clean car being the fashionable thing in Southern California, they were flipping it so that the fashionable thing was to have a dirty car. And they actually had a day of a competition where all the teachers and the administrations came in, and all the students got to vote on who had the dirtiest car. It was wonderful.
That's a very cool idea. I love that idea. A dirty car project. Cheney, some examples of projects you've seen that show authenticity, and you can talk also about how you and MNPS support teachers doing those kind of projects.
Yeah, so again, thinking of authenticity is providing a real-world context for students. One of the best things that I think Buck provides as a resource to teachers is some statements to help craft the driving question. And the approach that I often like to take, and I encourage teachers to take when coaching them, is to phrase that question of how can we, as fill in the blank, and filling in that blank with a specific career or type of career, a specific job. I think that helps ground the projects in a real-world context. But what I've discovered from working with many of our general education content area teachers, so English, such as John, or math, or science, or social studies, is that they may not have, or perceive that they have, enough content in a career-based context. And so to combat that struggle or that challenge, in Metro Nashville Public Schools, we have a professional development program called the Teacher Industry Externship, where teams of teachers will spend 3 days working with business or industry partners. They're there initially observing, asking questions. It's like a very intense job shadow for 3 days, but making connections between the content that they teach and the real-world context that is aligned with a specific career field. And those 3-day teacher externships allow the teachers to then ground their projects in a real-world context and insert a specific career into that driving question: how can we as engineers, how can we as graphic designers? A really great example, we had some teachers that worked with the Entrepreneur Center here in Nashville, and the Entrepreneur Center serves to help local entrepreneurs launch their businesses. And one thing they learned the teachers did was that entrepreneurs are looking at ways of branding their business and getting their foot in the door. And so a project that came out of it was a graphic design project. How can we as graphic designers communicate the purpose of an organization, visually communicate the purpose of an organization? And they worked with, they picked one entrepreneur in Nashville who said, this is my company, this is the purpose, I need a company logo, design it. And students and teams designed a series of logos, and this was the authentic public audience also that John spoke to earlier. The entrepreneur came back and said, okay, here's what I like about these, here's what I don't like, I also want to use these colors, and here's what I'm going for. And ultimately, over the series of the project, led to him selecting we'll call it a winning logo or design. But that's what a graphic designer would do. And so I think it was interesting. It required students to communicate, to collaborate, to think critically, and it was real world. It was very authentic.
And also very inexpensive for the entrepreneur, I imagine.
Right, and just to add to that, he alluded to the fact that not only on the front end are they involved with those business partners, but they try to get them in to give feedback to the kids along the way. So there's this constant relationship, or at least an ongoing, I wouldn't say constant, but an ongoing relationship for the students to get feedback from those experts as they're working on their project. And that lends towards authenticity a great deal.
Right, it's kind of like the way they work is authentic too. It's not just an authentic product or an audience at the end, but they're actually working the way real world people do, by collaborating, by talking to experts. Yeah. All right, there's some more examples of projects. Todd, John, anybody can chime in here before I get to our challenge.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback on one thing that Jenny and Todd were mentioning with respect to the connections to the community. I think that's a big part of authenticity and student engagement. And I think in addition to the sorts of business internships that they were doing, I think sometimes an underutilized resource for classroom teachers are alumni for your school or students' parents. And so last year, for instance, I did a project on privacy, security, and civil liberties in the digital age. And so that was a simulation type activity, just as Todd had mentioned. And we put Edward Snowden on trial for the National Security Agency leaks, real world topics. Students got to decide if they wanted to be prosecution or defense, and they played specific roles. They were very engaged. But in the run-up to that, in the preparation for it, we brought in a parent who was a professional journalist who had actually worked on the Daniel Ellsberg Pentagon Papers leaks to the New York Times. He had been part of that journalistic team, talking about it from a journalist perspective. And then we brought in, from the government side, the deputy coordinator for cyber issues at the State Department, who negotiates cybersecurity agreements with other governments. And so she had, as you can imagine, a very different position on it. So the students got to hear the two expert competing positions on it, and then they got to make up their own mind and use that in their preparation for the trial. So I think that authentic use of experts is really important to engagement.
And I'm going to add to that, John, we were thinking around the same thing. I'm sure no other school systems have a challenge of parent engagement, but in Nashville, we sometimes struggle to get parents really engaged in the education of their children. But parent engagement does not mean only that parents are coming into the schools. I think we can engage parents in a variety of ways. And another challenge that teachers talk about is having interdisciplinary project-based lessons. So I think that we can definitely use our parents as a fantastic resource for idea generation. We talk about authenticity being grounded in a real-world context. Well, at some point, we want our students will become productive citizens. They may become parents. They may become homeowners. And so one opportunity is for students to design a survey asking parents about problems that they would like to have solved in their homes. So I'm thinking of a teacher who did a survey and said, if there's, what question or what would you like help with in your home, or what types of problem would you like to be solved? And in this context, the students collected surveys, but in their math class, they quantified, they tried to group and quantify into different categories to pick what they were, the different projects that they were going to try to solve as a homeowner. So how can we as homeowners and then solve the problem? So I think that provides context for math. Then there was a career and tech ed class, an agriculture class aimed to approach the problem. So two that I remember, one parent said, how can I get rid of moles in my yard? Which I don't know if some of those of us watching probably have had moles in our yard, and they can be quite annoying. And another said, how can I produce food for my family? So immediately I remember the student said, well, just our backyard is easy. But it required the students to then send out to match with others, because there were quite a few who wanted to know about this, having gardens or raising their own food. And what students realized is that being a homeowner does not mean that you have a plot of land where you can grow, because or necessarily even being a homeowner, you may be renting an apartment, you might live in a townhome where you don't have access to grass, or you may live on an acre or in a subdivision where you have a plot of land that you could actually cultivate. They learned there was not a one-size-fits-all to growing a garden, because I remember they were making suggestions of things, and one person said, well, this is great, but I come from Hispanic background and I really want to make salsa, so you have not included some of the key ingredients in salsa. So then the students realized we have to go back and get more information from these parents. Why do they want to grow food? What types of food are they wanting to grow? Is there a purpose? I remember they suggested cilantro for someone, and the person came back and said, I hate cilantro. I don't like the way it smells. Why would I do that? And so the students, while frustrating, had to keep going back to the drawing board, and what they realized is that they were essentially problem solving for people, but their customer was the parent, and I think they got the value of asking all the important questions up front. Of course, it took them a while to get that, but again, in real world context, something that they would have to do as a homeowner as well.
Okay, love that story. And I love cilantro, but there are two kinds of people in the world, those who love cilantro and those who don't. So. And the students learned that. Okay, great example, Janie. I want to ask you about some of the challenges teachers face, and we've touched on this a little bit already, finding ideas, and John and Todd, you've led a lot of our PBL 101 workshops where teachers in different subject areas might struggle with how to be authentic. I'm thinking about math, world languages. John, you mentioned English, which is often tricky to sort of, how do you get a novel into an authentic context? Teachers have a struggle with that sometimes. And I used to teach history, and history is another one that can be tricky to make authentic because it's stuff that happened a long time ago. It's not happening right now in the real world, so to speak. So how do you help teachers overcome some of those challenges? And Channing, I also want to hear a little more about how NPS kind of organize these externships and support for teachers to learn about authentic context for their work.
Well, I'll start it, and I'll answer that question and give Todd and John some time to think. Our externship program, we work collaboratively with the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce because they have quite a few business contacts. And so we have schools propose teams of teachers to participate in the professional development experience initially, and as a team of teachers, they list the types of industries with which they would like to work, and they generate ideas of potential businesses with which they would like to work in Nashville. So we can work through the Chamber of Commerce and see if they have any contacts or connections at those businesses, or they may currently be an existing business partner with Metro Nashville Public Schools. And those are the easiest because we already have the points of contact.
So, Jamie, teachers make the suggestions you said, but are they sort of, if they're drawing a blank, do they collaborate in a department or a grade level, or do they have
Great question.
Coach?
Yeah, we don't send teachers out individually, so the requirement to participate in externship is that you be part of a collaborative team of at least 3 teachers. And so they're brainstorming initially what types of industries or businesses we would like to work with. They're already thinking about types of projects. They may even be thinking of what businesses are right down the road. What is close to the school to provide that training.
Okay.
Yeah, and so then we approach the business partners. We try to make those connections, and we host an orientation for potential businesses. They're willing to host teachers for the externship. We have a manual that we put together to help them come up with ideas of things they could do with the teachers and things such as that.
All right, very cool.
So I would say to your question, John, and you brought up history, which was my passion as well. But I think we have to sometimes, no matter what our field is, ask ourselves as teachers, what is it that a historian does, or what is it that a scientist does? And historians don't sit around memorizing facts. They're researching, they're analyzing documents, they're making an argument and defending with evidence. And so giving students the opportunity to practice those skills or practice what it is a biologist does. Mathematicians are probably not sitting home at night doing 50 of the same problem over and over and over. They're thinking about where it applies in the real world. And so as a teacher, we have to ask ourselves also, where does this key concept that I want my students to know and be able to do, where does it apply in the real world? And then figure out a way to let them practice the application in addition to understanding the foundational pieces that go into it. And a lot of times they will uncover those foundational pieces because challenge makes sense to them and you're providing some context. And then a lot of times the teachers are, we've done a good job of building some relationships with business partners, but I've worked with teachers here in our district and other districts that are kind of timid about asking someone from the outside to come in, and you've got to kind of get over your fear of doing that and expose the students to people beyond just you as the teacher, and admit sometimes we don't have all the answers ourselves. That's why we want to collaborate with others and give the students that opportunity.
Yeah, before I hear from John, I just want to highlight what you said, Todd, there. Yeah, students sometimes students are fearful about contacting experts, but so are teachers, like you said. They're used to being, in their classroom, in their school setting, and so to step out into the real world might be a big step for some teachers. Even though after they get used to it, I'm sure it's very invigorating and exciting to keep in that way. But I think the things the district does, like you've described and Chinny described, really helps people make that first step.
And I think you also have to have this gradual release mindset. You've got to take baby steps. So maybe you start with a simulation without an expert, but the next time you do it, go ahead and invite one expert in and see how it goes, and grow yourself, because think big, start small, basically, is what we want to encourage teachers to do. If you try to bring in too many people and too much too quick, then you can maybe not have the success and feel like you want to just give up on the whole thing, when really you just need to keep going in increments and get better at it as you go.
That's a good point. John?
Well, with respect, you mentioned, John, history classes, English classes, government classes, that sort of a thing, and what are the real-world connections? I would say, from the teacher's perspective, take a step back and look at what are the underlying themes or issues that are really in play in this particular period of history or in this particular novel. Is it a broad issue of identity, or an issue of justice, or an issue of inequality, these sorts of things? And then think about real-world current affairs that have corollaries for those. And students, they'll make those connections quickly, and they'll get excited about it, and they'll be able to sort of see the analog between what they're studying and what the real-world equivalent of that is. Now, as you do that, for me, one of the things that I've learned over time is the importance for the teacher of giving them the tools, as Todd was saying, helping them to think like a historian, but giving them the tools to think critically, to think deeply, and to express their ideas and to support their ideas with evidence, but not telling them what to think. And that's really crucial, because they're excited about this, and then they get attached to their position, and they don't want their teacher steering their ideology or their beliefs. So I'm always very careful never to actually tell them what I personally think, whether it's about immigration reform or Ed Snowden or whatever the issue might be. I say I want you to think deeply, and my job is to help you to do that, not to tell you what to think, but to help you to think deeply.
All right, excellent point to wrap up on, Todd. John. So, guys, I'll get back to you for a final word in a minute. It's almost 12:30 here in California, so just want to remind viewers out there that this archive has been recorded this hangout has been recorded, and you can find it on our archive at bie.org, as well as reading material and other hangouts about our gold standard project-based learning model. So let's have a final word from our guests, and let's go Janie, Todd, John this time. Good.
Yeah. Well, good luck. I know that creating authentic projects can be quite challenging, but I think tap into the resources that you have, and we've talked about the parents and local business and industry, and I would also encourage you to tap into your colleagues, your fellow teachers, because you never know who has professional contacts outside of the school that will help you facilitate authentic project-based learning.
All right, thanks for being with us, Janie.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just go ahead and ask, and maybe like I mentioned earlier, try something small, and just keep growing in increments with it. Ask people that you encounter. I was thinking of last year, I had my home remodeled, and I had one of the guys the subcontractor spraying that foam insulation in, and I started talking to him about speaking to students, and he was perfectly willing. So you never know who might be willing to work with your students and teachers, but you won't know until you ask.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, don't go in feeling that you need to have the answers before you start. Just have a sense of curiosity and reach out. Last week we were meeting with a local nonprofit that works with the local Spanish-speaking community, and they do a food bank every week. And I was meeting with them with a teacher who teaches upper division Spanish-speaking students. And it emerged in the conversation that they didn't have any materials written in Spanish to tell their clientele about this food bank. So right there, just organically, we found something that class could do to provide an authentic product to this local nonprofit.
Yeah, great example, and we've got other examples too, that, like Janie mentioned, about where students perform real services for people in the community or businesses. You can't get much more authentic than that. So, all right, well, thanks a lot, gentlemen, for joining us today, and thank you, everyone out there, for watching. And our next hangout will be on February 9th with more of our national faculty guests, and it'll be on the topic of assessing student learning. That's one of our gold standard PBL project-based teaching practices. So we'll hear examples from K through 12 projects about how teachers can work on assessing student learning. So we hope to see you then, and thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.